Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched. I'm your host, the Social Solipsist, and this week I watched Robin and the Seven Hoods from 1964. So this movie is one I've been meaning to watch for a strangely long time because of one particular song in it. And that's kind of the only reason. Every once in a while I've thought about it because somebody in the cast comes up or somebody makes a reference. But this movie is actually not all that well known. It does have the song My Kind of Town, which is known pretty well as a Sinatra staple. But aside from that, this is kind of a mediocre film and released at the kind of towards the end of the Rat Pack's heyday. For if I didn't really lead with that, but this is a Rat Pack film. Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., Dean Martin, and in this case Bing Crosby, who's not generally a member of the Rat Pack, but replaced another member of the Rat Pack. Lawford was supposed to be cast in his role, and instead was got recast for personal reasons. That's a whole story unto itself, apparently. But got recast as Bing Crosby replaced him, which is fascinating because Bing Crosby is kind of great in his role. This also came up because it is sort of related to Robin Hood, which we watched some weeks ago now, and talking about sort of adaptations of the Robin Hood story. Unfortunately, this movie kind of doesn't capitalize on that very much. The Robin Hood thing goes from being almost completely absent to way too overt, where they are literally saying in the film, oh, he's just like Robin Hood, rather than what they were doing near the beginning of the film that was sort of suggesting that they're like, it's analogy only. It's like a retelling of the Robin Hood story in a more modern context. But then it jumps the shark very quickly and goes, he's just like Robin Hood. And now people are literally wearing green tunics and hats and have bows and arrows and all this shit. And it's genuinely just weird. It's a fascinating set piece because this is made in the 60s, but it's set in the 20s, ostensibly during the Prohibition era, when in the United States the alcohol was made illegal, and there was a lot of sort of crime and organized crime surrounding the facilitation of illegal actions, mostly having parties and drinking and gambling, because it was a particularly, well, we could get into the whole reason why prohibition happened and such, but that's neither here nor there. It's an interesting premise because it's sort of suggesting that like the concept of you have these rival mobster groups that are sort of like, one is more on the up and up and cares about people, and one's just there to, get his cut. And they go so far as to name a bunch of characters after characters in the Robin Hood stories. But in the initial part of the film, they sort of don't say a lot more than that. The analogy is there, and you're just sort of seeing how it goes. And because it's Frank Sinatra in basically the lead role, with Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. as his flanking guys, like, obviously the idea is you're supposed to root for these guys. They're the Rat Pack after all, and regardless of what their reputation was or ever has been, and what's kind of amusing is the known associations and speculated associations between some of those guys, Sinatra in particular, and various actual real world mob characters, it's kind of an amusing thing, and it almost starts to feel like, at least with the knowledge we have now about those relationships, that it's a little bit propagandistic, saying like, oh, not all mobsters are bad, but that's also just sort of a lot of mob films. Is somebody has to be the hero, and somebody has to be more heroic, and somebody has to be more villainous, and it's usually the guy who is just out for himself, that's the villain, and the one who's a little bit more compassionate but still sort of a tough guy, who plays the heroic side. But the movie just takes this swift turn where something minor and seemingly kind of inconsequential happens in the story, and it's suddenly like, oh, everybody's literally just heralding Frank Sinatra, this character who goes by Robbo, as a modern Robin Hood, and it just immediately jumps the shark. It's like, really, you named the character Robbo, and then he is Robin Hood in the world of the movie? It's very weird, and it's way too on the nose. Meanwhile, the story doesn't actually do a lot to convince us that Sinatra's character or his compatriots are really into the idea of being the Robin Hood characters, of being these, they do a little bit to say like, oh yeah, well we did these we gave to the poor because it was an easy way to do this, and I guess we'll keep doing it to keep us on the up and up. And it almost leverages it as a way to explain some other sort of power dynamics within the world and between the good guys and the bad guys groups. But it never really does a lot more than just sort of say very overtly, oh, well, we can't do such and such to the good guys because the greater public, despite them being hoodlums, mob guys, likes them because they seem to be nice. And so the whole thing, it sort of falls apart. Meanwhile, the whole plot just doesn't go a lot of places. Where at the beginning it's set up as basically very much in the line of the original Robin Hood story, where you have the more numerous, more villainous characters who want Robin Hood eliminated and want his assets taken away, and thinks that he's doing things that are bad for their aims. That all sort of disappears into ether, and the ultimate arc, the thing that really only kind of matters in the very last 50, like the main plot of the movie basically happens in the last 15 minutes of the film in a way that makes no sense and is completely both tonally inappropriate and disruptive to the story as it's being told. Plus it ignores, all these things they've set up before and really subverts the whole Robin Hood story in the first place. Now I could talk about what am I going to talk about here? I guess I need to talk about the Rat Pack and the performances. All of the Rat Pack members are great performers, but very few of them have genuine impressive acting chops. And unfortunately, Sinatra might have the worst acting chops of all of them. Sammy Davis Jr. is constantly, like in whatever he's in, just like a ray of charisma that just blasts onto the screen. Dean Martin has some ups and downs. He can play a darker character. He can play a lighter character. He's not quite as charismatic, but he's like got a little bit of range. Bing Crosby, who I think I've only seen in like one or two other things, and it's technically not a member of the Rat Pack, has a presence on screen that I think is has a lot of dynamics to it, even if I don't know all of what he's potentially capable of, but I think he's one of the better players in this movie in particular. Sinatra, meanwhile, in almost everything I've ever seen him in, is plays more or less the same guy. He basically plays a cleaned up version of Sinatra the man, um, and is really in no small part. I mean, structural issues aside with this movie, he is the downfall of this movie because he is supposed to be our hero. Um, Robin Hood as a character is a generally like kind of happy-go-lucky, positive, sunshiny guy who's trying to pull up all these other people down on their luck. Pull up the people out of the gutters and get them food and clothing and make them happy and give them the resources they need. And Sinatra at no point puts anything on the screen to make that a believable thing from him. He is written to have a characterization that is more on the heroic side, but that cannot be credited to the actor, to Sinatra himself at all. That is purely in the writing, that he makes a few decisions that make sure that he is continually on the right side of things. But again, even that doesn't matter because writing problems and the whole subversion of the original through line of like the Guy Gisborne character and these people who are trying to sort of subvert his actions is all kind of thrown by the wayside. Meanwhile, that last 15 minutes, I'll leave it open for anybody who wants to watch this, but really just sort of really just disrespects it's the final nail in the Robin Hood analogy coffin, because it does some things, like one or two things that are surprisingly accurate to the stories, and a bunch of shit that's just like, let's just have whatever character be whatever character archetype we want them to be. And this character is now a villain for some reason, and has motivations that make no sense within the Robin Hood story. And listen, I'm not going to be a purist about this. This is an adaptation. You can have those reworkings, but if you're going to try so hard to frame them near the beginning as these analogous characters, and then suddenly you tell me that they have a dramatic change of heart, but that comes out of nowhere and has no in-universe explanation, it makes it hard to follow and hard to care about and hard to believe is like genuine. So like I'm really not sure what to do with that. Now, production wise, it's actually pretty good. This is a later film in the Rat Pack. I was about to say Rat Pack cinematic universe. But the production values are very high. There's some really actually extremely nice set work. And I'm going to say that 90%, if not this entire film, is done on sets, including there are some driving things that I think are done on open set, or like the large sets that they have in some locations in Hollywood, like this is a Warner Brothers film, so I think it's probably like the WB backlot location. And everything looks really good. The lighting is done really well. The colorization or the like all of the stylistic aspects, the paint jobs, the character outfits, and the way it is all filmed is all like very visually compelling and engaging and very nice to look at. Even in scenes when it's deliberately trying to be gritty and dirty, it's like, oh, but this looks like a place that's just been lived in and is like down on its luck, not a place that's just grimy to make us feel nasty. And I think that's a credit to a particular era of film production, one that is typically thought of as a few years earlier than this. But like, this is sort of, I want to say, towards the end of the really substantial chunk of movie musicals. from like the 40s to the 60s is like late 50s, early 60s is really the heyday of the like Hollywood comedy musical, of which there are quite a lot, and I like a lot of them. Or, well, there's a lot of them, and I've only seen so many, but it's generally something I like. But it really pales in the comparison. Putting this next to, even for all of the really nice production, including one particular set that if you've seen this film, you know, like there's this a set that there's a very, very impressive set, and the way people act on this set, including quite a lot of extras, is really impressive. I love this set, and this movie's almost good enough to watch just for that one scene, but frankly, just watch the one scene. It's near the middle. For all those production values, this really pales in comparison to a lot of other things that came out, both other Rat Pack things and other sort of comedy musicals. Obviously, there are some very famous ones that I would recommend before this. Things like Singing in the Rain, The Music Man, Guys and Dolls, which has a bunch of like, and that was the one I was thinking of probably the most while watching this, is just like, this isn't as good as Guys and Dolls, and I don't even love Guys and Dolls that much. And really, the biggest nail in the coffin, in addition to the story problems, the writing problems, the character problems, is the songs are not that good. And that was incredibly disappointing to me, because half of the reason I watched this is because this scene in the middle has a really great song in it. And it's not even the one this movie is known for. This movie is known for My Kind of Town, but the song in the middle, Mr. Booze, is dramatically better. It's also basically led by Bing Crosby, who does an excellent job throughout this whole movie, but in his singing roles also tends to be a standout. So that's the standout song. A lot of the other ones are very, like, pretty mediocre, not very compelling, and they're recorded poorly, where I genuinely asked while watching it, are these like first takes? Were these rehearsed enough? Or do the guys not care? Are they too famous to care about showing up and learning their lines and shit? Because all of the sound for the songs is ADR'd. It's done, it's recorded and then it's filmed to sync. And the problem is that, like, some of the sync is, or the recording is bad, where it's like, you've got these guys who have performed together before, and they're not singing in time together, or they seem to be like ad-libbing in weird places that make things feel like off time, or like weirdly syncopated in certain places. And the song itself not being that good in the first place doesn't help all that, but it's made even worse by visuals on screen that seem to suggest that they don't necessarily know their choreography either, and they've forgotten the words. And listen, fair enough. No, I'm not even going to say that. It's not fair enough. If you're going to be singing in a production, in a movie, and you're going to ADR it, you better perform your heart out when you are doing the visual aspect. Even if you're not really singing the part, even if you're just sort of like mouthing along, you need to nail it. And watching these allegedly like immaculate professionals like just sort of mumble because the film transfer is quality enough that you can see their mouths moving. Like if you're dropping words, if this is tantamount to watching some famous person mouth the wrong words to the national anthem at a basketball game or a baseball game or something like that, if you're doing this for a rather expensive film. I mean, it's $4.2 million. It's not outrageously expensive, but for 64, that's still not cheap. Like, do better. So, in all, like, the final awful thing is that last 15 minutes that doesn't match up in any way with the rest of the film, and an incredibly disappointing ending that it was pointed out to me actually does very slightly make sense, and is in keeping with the Robin Hood story, but like doesn't make any sense in the context of the movie itself. It's just a real mess. It's a real disappointment. And I'd hoped this had been a lot better. Now, if you just love the Rat Pack, or you just love movie musicals, and you want to spend like an hour and a half watching this, like, it's kind of short, so it's not terrible. There are plenty of things worse that you could watch, but for my expectations for this group of guys, I just expected better. That's kind of all there is to it. So anyway, thank you guys for watching another episode of Solipsist Watched. I've been your host, the Social Solipsist, and I'll see you guys next time.